You're having a wonderful night. Time for this day's installment of The Lost Years of Merlin. We are on chapter 23 called Great Losses. In the last chapter, Emerus and Rhea and now Shim got betrayed by our stick lady named Quen, and she gave up. She brought some goblin warriors to them because they want the Galator for their king, and they promised her that they would use the Galator to make her young again. However, instead of doing that, they cut off her arm and she went running into the mist. Then they were going to attack Rhea and Emerus, but then a tree sacrificed himself for them and fell on the goblins, and then the Grandalusa came out and chased them all away, and then they used the river to escape. So they still have the Galator, luckily, and they are still also alive. Good times. Okay, time for chapter 23, called Great Losses. Rhea collapsed on the bank, her garb of leaves wet and glistening in the sun. As the surface of the river returned to normal, a thin finger of water splashed across her hand. It clung there for an instant before dissolving into the sand. But she did not seem to notice. Morosely, she kicked at the emerald reeds at the river's edge. I sat down beside her. Thank you for saving us. Thank the river, not me. The river unceasing is one of my oldest friends in the forest. He bathed me as an infant, watered me as a child. Now he has saved us all. I glanced at the waterway, then at Shim, who had flopped down on his back in the sun. For the first time, no dirt and honey covered his clothing, and I noticed that his baggy shirt was woven of some sort of yellowish bark. Suddenly, I remembered the yellow-rimmed eye of Trouble. Had the brave hawk eluded the swarm of bees? If he had not, had he survived their wrath? And if he had, would he ever be able to find me again? My shoulder felt strangely bereft without him sitting there. I turned to Rhea, who looked more glum than I. You don't seem very glad. How can I be glad? I lost 2 friends today. One old, one new. Her eyes wandered across my face. Quen I've known ever since she found me abandoned so long ago. The old elm I met a few minutes before she felled herself to spare us harm. They couldn't be more different. One crooked and bent, the other straight and tall. One stole my loyalty, the other gave me life, but I grieve for both. I heaved a sigh. The elm won't see its saplings ever again. She lifted her chin a bit. Arbassa wouldn't agree. Arbassa would say they'll meet again in the other world, that we all will someday. Do you really believe that? She drew a deep breath. I'm not sure. I know I want to believe it, but whether we really meet after the long journey, I don't know. What long journey? It's the voyage to the other world, after Ifenchairen dies. Arbassa says the more a person needs to learn when she dies, then the longer her long journey must be. In that case, even if the other world is real, it would take me forever to get there. Maybe not. She glanced at the rushing river, then back at me. Arbassa also told me that, sometimes, the bravest and truest souls are spared the long journey completely. Their sacrifice is so great that they are brought right to the other world at the very instant of death. I scoffed at this. So instead of dying, they just disappear? One second they're here, writhing in pain, and the next second they're in the other world, dancing merrily? I don't think so. Rhea lowered her head. It does sound hard to believe. It's impossible, especially if they're not capable of such sacrifice anyway. What do you mean by that? If they're too cowardly, I bit my lip. Rhea, I could have done more, much more, to help you. She looked at me sympathetically. What more could you have done? I have some, powers. Nothing to do with the Galator. I don't begin to understand them, except they are strong. Too strong. Powers like your second sight? Yes, but stronger, fiercer, wilder. For a moment I listened to the churning water of the river unceasing. I never asked for such powers. They just came to me. Once, in a rage, I used them badly, and they cost me my eyes. They cost another boy much more. They weren't meant for mortals, these powers. I promise never to use them again." "Who did you promise?" "God, the great healer of Bronwyn's prayers. I promised that, if only I might somehow see again, I would give up my powers forever. And God heard my plea. But still, I should have used them back there, to save you, promise or no promise." She peered at me through her tangle of curls. "Something tells me that this promise isn't the only reason you didn't want to use your powers." My mouth went dry. "The truth is, I fear them. With all my heart, I fear them." I pulled a reed out of the shallow water and twisted it roughly with my fingers. "Bronwyn once told me that God gave me those powers to use, if only I could learn to master them. To use them well," she said, "with wisdom and love. But how can you use wisely something you fear to touch? How can you use lovingly something that could destroy your eyes, your life, your very soul? It's impossible." She waited quite a while before responding. Then she waved toward the white-capped waters. "The river unceasing appears to be just a line of water flowing from here to there. Yet he is more, much more. He is all that he is, including whatever hides beneath the surface. What does that have to do with me?" "Everything. I think Bronwyn was right. If someone, God, Dagda, or whoever, gave you special powers, they are for you to use, just as the river unceasing has his own powers to use. You are all that you are." I shook my promise. I shook my head. "So I should ignore my promise?" "Don't ignore it, but ask yourself if that is really what this God wanted you to do. He gave me back my sight. He gave you back your powers." "That's insane!" I exclaimed. "You have no idea—" A loud snort from somewhere nearby cut me off. I jumped, thinking it came from a wild boar. Then came the snort again, and I realized it was not a boar after all. It was Shim. He had fallen asleep on the sandbar. Rhea watched the tiny figure. "He snores loud enough to be a true giant." "At least, with him, you can see what he really is with just one look. With me, it's not so simple." She turned back to me. "You worry about who you are too much. Just be yourself, and you'll find out eventually." "Eventually?" I stood angrily. "Don't try to tell me about my life. Stick to your own life, if you please." She stood to face me. "It might help you to think about somebody's life besides your own. I've never met anybody more wrapped up in himself. You're the most selfish person I've ever met. Even if you are—" She stopped herself. "Forget it. Just go away and worry about yourself some more." "I think I'll do just that." I stomped off into the thick forest by the river unceasing. Too angry to watch where I was going, I crashed through the underbrush, bruising my shins and scraping my thighs. This made me all the angrier, and I cursed loudly. Finally, I sat down on a rotting trunk that was already mostly a mound of soil. Suddenly, I heard a gruff voice shout, "Get him!" 2 warrior goblins, the same ones we had eluded upstream, jumped from the underbrush and threw me to the ground. One of them pointed a sword at my chest, and the other produced a large sack made of roughly stitched brown cloth. "None of your tricks this time," growled the goblin with the sword. He beckoned to the other with a burly gray-green hand. "Get him in the sack!" At that instant, a piercing whistle shot from the sky. The goblin with the sword cried out and fell back, his arms bleeding from the gouges of the talons. "Trouble!" I rolled out of the fray and jumped to my feet. The merlin, talons slashing and wings flapping in the face of the goblin, drove him back several paces. Every time the goblin slashed with his sword, Trouble dived into his face, ripping at the eyes beneath the pointed helmet. Despite the huge size advantage of the goblin, the small hawk's ferocity was proving too much. But Trouble did not count on the other goblin joining the battle. Before I could shout any warning, the second warrior whipped his powerful hand through the air. He caught the hawk in mid-dive. Trouble slammed into the trunk of a tree and fell stunned to the ground. He lay there, utterly still, his wings spread wide. The last thing I saw was the first goblin raising his sword to chop the merlin into pieces. Then, something smashed me on the head and day turned into night. And on that little cliffhanger, the chapter ends, and we'll have to wait until tomorrow to find out what happens. So tomorrow, we shall read chapter 24, called The Switch. Join me at 9 p.m. Pacific time. Okay, bye!